Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Opticare. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge. In today's episode of The Focused View, we're talking about something that can make or break your practice culture, having difficult conversations. In this Elevate Your Practice episode, I'm joined again by Joanne Scott-Dostine to unpack how to approach tough talks with confidence and clarity. From switching hats as a leader, to managing emotion and language, to actually strengthening your team in the process. This conversation is all about leading with intent and getting better outcomes, even when the conversation feels uncomfortable. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Jo. It's good to have you back on.
It's been a while. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love our chats, and we obviously, in the broader context of what we discussed with the Elevate Your Practice series, I think really touch on a lot of practical tips and advice that I guess you've had with regards to the experience with the stores that you've coached and the things that you've done along the way. So today we're talking about something that's probably something I think everyone is interested in, and that's basically having difficult conversations at work. So I guess from a beginning point of view, and we're going to get into it obviously in quite a lot of detail, but what's your take on it, I guess, just as a lead-in and as we sort of start this conversation? What would you sort of say about it as an intro?
I think that if we're talking about leadership and we're talking about the way practices run, probably people is the biggest part that people underestimate on the time and how hard it is to manage. You can't control the way people are. You can't control the output. You can control how you react, but you can't control what people do. So often you need to have conversations around things that happen. It could be a customer complaint. It could be the team dynamics. It could be anything that's happening. It could be workload or anything. But it's a really hard thing to do because most people are not trained to do it. Human nature is we avoid it. And so I feel that it's a conversation that I actually have regularly. When I'm coaching people, one of the big things that comes up a lot is I get calls to say, hey, this just happened. Can you walk me through what I should do? Because I'm not sure how to fix this. I'm not sure what the next step should be. I'm not sure, how to move forward. And also understanding what legally they can do, the way that they should do it in a way that is managing the situation without getting themselves into trouble. So there's lots of issues around it. And I feel that it is a bit of a struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah, and what intrigues me about today's topic is obviously this conversation and the conversations that we have are all within the optical space with regards to, managing a practice or running a practice, whether it's optometry, optical dispensing.
This one's not.
It is, this one's not.
This one's not.
No, this one is really a people-orientated. We're not going to really be speaking about anything optical or anything specific to optics. It's more about the team and how you're going to sort of manage those situations when you need to have that difficult conversation. And I guess if I preface it a little bit more, the nature of a lot of the businesses that we interact with is small business. And so it's family orientated, sort of much like, the businesses that we have. And as a result, it might make these conversations a little bit more difficult too.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that people avoid them. So I guess if we start at that point, why do you think people avoid difficult conversations, especially in a practice setting?
Well, I think you touched on some of that just then when you said about the relationships and the closeness and the smallness of a team. A lot of the time, we actually are already thinking about the reaction we're going to get because we know the person. We also don't want to upset people because a lot of the time it's hard to get good people and it's hard to replace people in a store, and we don't want to do something that might make somebody leave. And that doesn't matter what business it is. I mean, we specifically hone in on optics, but that happens in all businesses. When you've got somebody that you've trained up and they've been with you for a while and they know your business, even though they might be a struggle to work with sometimes, you tend to avoid the bad side to focus in on, well, they do the majority okay. And we don't focus on the impact on the rest of the team. We don't focus on the impact on our business. And that's something we should be looking at. I think another thing, if I talk specifically about small business and in particular optics, a lot of the time in smaller businesses, we have an Optom owner. We have a lot of dispenser owners out in the market, but there's more Optom owners for small stores. They're in the room. They're testing. They're not on the floor. They don't see what's going on. So the things that are being said to them, they don't have evidence of what they've seen. They also are in avoidance mode because they're just busy and they're in the room trying to, to test and look after patients. So it makes it even harder for them to have a conversation about something that they've not witnessed. And often the team don't want to, they feel like they're, the Aussie thing, dobbing on somebody. If they say something about somebody, they want to tell you because they want to get it off their chest. But often when you say to them, well, what would you like me to do about it? Do you want me to now step in and do something about this? They'll often say, oh, no, because then they'll know. And that creates an even worse situation because you end up with this gap in the team that keeps happening. And so as a leader, you're avoiding that because you just go, okay, well, they don't want me to. I won't worry about it. When the hat should come on to say, I need to think about my business and I need to push back on this one a little bit. So I think we avoid because we're not trained. We're in the room. We don't see the evidence. We're scared of the outcomes because we know the personalities. So we think that we know somebody who's going to be reactive. We know somebody who'll go into their shell. We know somebody we could lose. So we actually, know, or we think we know what's going to happen. And we make assumptions. That's probably the worst thing about all of this. We make assumptions. We assume and we judge. And usually, as time goes on and you start to do this and you get better at it, you realize that it's actually an assumption. And when you have the conversation, it's like a load off the shoulders straight away. But both people are thinking the wrong thing. And as soon as you have the conversation, you realize it was all about assumptions that caused the issue to start with when you're talking about a team dynamic or about something that was said to a patient. A lot of the time it's either not trained or they're actually just feeling, they're upset and it's not as bad as you think it is. So when you have the conversation, it opens up and makes the conversation and the ongoing communication better.
And we've touched on a few, but what are some of the main consequences that you've seen in your experience when these issues aren't addressed as they're arising, when they're arising, and I guess after they've arisen? What are some of those consequences if you're really in that avoidance mode?
Yeah. If you are on social media, and it happens a lot on LinkedIn, there's this line that always says people don't leave the business, they leave bad leaders. So a lot of the time it's about their boss, their leader, the person they report to that's not managing situations well. And so you lose good people sometimes because they hate not seeing the bad things be pulled up. They actually feel like they're there working really hard. They're there giving everything. And there's somebody off to the side that's getting away with stuff. And that is upsetting to them. So sometimes you lose the good people because you're not addressing the people that are causing the issues. You obviously can have issues like social media today. The things that go viral usually are something bad that's written about you. It's very quick and easy. We've seen it with businesses that we're involved with. You see it all the time out in the market. One person has been upset, and Australians do not actually come and say anything to practices usually or to businesses. If you look at fair trading results, it's something like, 7 out of 10 don't even come and tell you. If the numbers are really high of the people that don't, they show you with their feet, they just don't come back again. So in your recalls, you won't get them. So you don't always have that opportunity, but they will, in this day and age, they're really happy to be warriors and jump on to social media and talk about how bad the whole situation was. And so it can impact you from a business point of view as well, because if people who are at that time just happen to see that review because they're now looking for an optometrist in the area or a business in the area, they might actually see that review and decide not to come in, because lots of people will choose the business they're going to based on the reviews. So they read those things. So that's really, something that can be a big impact as well. But just in general, if you've got a repetitive thing that's happening, a behavior or a problem in store that's happening, and it might not be bad enough that the patients are complaining or the team's complaining, but it's bad enough that they don't come back, the way you'll see it is the reduction in your growth. So you might end up a bit stagnant. Your recall rates will be lower than what you want them to be. Your new patient rates might not be at the level that you need to sustain and build a business. So all the little, KPI numbers and stuff, won't be at the level they could be. And sometimes it's related to somebody on the team or something that's happening within the team. So that's, there's a lot of big things that can come from not addressing problems in the team dynamic or personality or skills or what they do, the way they work.
Yeah, and you're speaking there to, I guess, the direct implication that avoiding some of these difficult conversations can have when it comes to the sales of the business and the customer effect that could have. I guess something that I've seen over the time, I guess, that I've been involved with, the businesses I've been involved with, is even if it's a small issue and it's not communicated, what invariably can happen in avoiding it is it builds over time.
Mountain out of a molehill, that's the saying, isn't it?
Basically.
Exactly what it is, yeah. It's like a cancer that eats away.
Yeah, it eats away, and then that leads on to culture, and it leads on to other team members. But then eventually what you might see is a meltdown.
Yep.
Or something, and it might be over and it's very small. Generally, that could trigger it, but it's not that one thing in isolation that's triggered it. It's a combination of a whole heap of things that have happened over the previous, who knows how long.
Yeah. Bacon wars is what I call it. Well, I watched there was a presentation years ago at another place I worked at. Somebody was talking about this thing they called bacon wars, and it was a simple thing saying that there was two teams. They took it in turns to cook in the morning. One liked their bacon crunchy, one liked it soft, and so they would cook it the way they liked it. The other team thought they were doing it to upset them, and when they really got down to things, they realized that was the result of other underlying issues. They used that because it was an easy thing to have a conversation and to get angry about, rather than addressing the real issues. So as you say, sometimes these little things add up, and then all of a sudden somebody breaks and they walk, or they're yelling and screaming, or it's something that's really hard to come. I don't want to work with that person anymore. I don't want to work here anymore. There's lots of issues that come out of it.
Yeah, and I guess, there is a whole heap of things, and I'm sure if we were to focus on all of them, we'd be here all day. So I guess we've touched on the main things, I think, that come to our attention. And if we start to look further into this, and particularly with how we can work at addressing these difficult conversations, one of the things that you've spoken to me about, and I guess I've highlighted here, is this notion of an emotional bank account. And I guess it sort of stems from, building the relationship. But can you explain what is the emotional bank account and why does it matter for people in leadership roles within, their particular businesses?
My early days, when I stepped out of optics and I went into ladies fashion, I had an amazing leader there, and they had this really great culture and philosophy. And she taught me about the emotional bank account. What she said to me was, if you treat a person, and it sounds weird, but you treat the relationship and the person like a bank account. So you need to put lots of deposits in. Now, deposits are praise. They're things that you say, you're doing a great job, really like what you did there, really love listening to what that person said about you there. Can you show somebody else that, because it's a great way of doing it? All these great little positive, affirmations that you're giving somebody is building up your bank account balance with them, right? So then when you have a difficult conversation, that's a withdrawal. And then what you find is when you've done this really well, you've built up that really good relationship. When you go in and have that harder conversation, the person's more open to it because they actually understand that you truly are there to better them. You truly are there to actually help them. And so that withdrawal is a conversation where you sit down to say, look, I've got to talk to you about something. They understand that it's an honest, bit of feedback. They understand you're not doing it because you're being a cow. You're doing it because you truly are trying to make them better and help them, progress and grow as a person. And all they're thinking about in their mind is generally what she gives me is good stuff, or he gives me, or they give me is good stuff. It's usually all the good stuff. They pick it up all the time, so I know they're looking out for the good stuff. This one time it's something that's a bit negative. I actually will sit and listen to it. I won't put my wall up. I'll be open to it because I know it comes from a good place. So it makes the conversation a bit easier. So I do talk to people about that because I feel that it's a really easy way of explaining praise and then, the difficult stuff with people. And people love praise. When you look at what people find when they list what they like about jobs and what they want in a job, remuneration is not really at the top, but praise, wanting to belong, understanding what the role is, they're all the things that sit near the top. So praise is really important.
Yeah, and that analogy and thinking of it like that also gets you thinking about both sides of the equation, because difficult conversations are generally around negative aspects of the business or of the relationship.
And it's difficult for both. It's not difficult for just the
Yeah.
receiver. It's difficult for the person
Yeah.
giving it
Oh,
because it's a hard skill to learn. So
yeah.
I found in my early days, I would say, look, I find this as hard as you find it. I don't like having to have
Mm,
these conversations. It's really
yeah.
hard for me to sit down and talk to you about this stuff. But I know if I do, we'll both be better for it in the long run.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a part that you play. So sometimes it's saying, I know I played a part in this. I know I probably haven't given you the training you needed, but I need to talk to you about this because it's now becoming an issue. Let's work on what we can do to make it better in the future. What can I do to support you? And let's talk about what you can do to change what you're doing now so it's better all round. So, yeah, pulling yourself in and understanding that it actually works both ways. It's not easy. Most people don't like that either.
Yeah. But again, and those last few snippets there are some really, pieces of gold there, because if you're prefacing a difficult conversation in that context, it does take away a little bit of the difficulty of it, because you're talking about it in a way where you're being holistic in your approach,
Yeah.
and it's not just,
And
I
really,
want to tell you something bad. It's like, this is hard for me, and I'm acknowledging that. And that's also an element of vulnerability too, because it's like, well, I'm telling you that I'm struggling a little bit as well
yeah,
in this process. And I feel like if you can be genuine in that communication,
yeah,
hopefully it leads to a better outcome. And it's a good way to think about it.
yeah. Vulnerable is a big thing. I think that's a good thing what you said. I think that it's something that a lot of people as leaders feel that they shouldn't show. But a
Mm,
good leader is strategic and empathetic, but they actually have to show vulnerability. You have to show that you're not perfect. You have to show that you understand that there's things that you contribute to. You become a real person then, and it makes it easier for people to actually relate to you and for you to build relationships if you can do that.
and again, I think that it's just because we're all people at the end of the day,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter what the nature of the role is, or it doesn't matter who they are. At the end of the day, people are people, emotions are emotions. They're all the same, and we want to be treated equally in that regard. And I feel like that's an important part of that.
Yeah.
The relationship is obviously so key as well. And the thing I like about that bank account analogy is it does think about the relationship, I think, holistically, by providing praise, the credits,
Yeah.
I guess knowing that there might be some withdrawals over that time.
Yeah.
So in light of that, and not thinking about it so strategically, but maybe trying to make it more genuine, how do you maintain a good relationship that will still enable you to hold the team to be accountable at times that require it?
Yeah. The big turning point for me, a couple of things happened in my career that made me get better at this and made me think about it a little bit more. So when I first started managing, I was in my 20s, so I was quite young. And so I used to feel like I had to do everything. I had to be, the one that controlled everything, that did everything. I was the one that, made sure that everything happened and worked well. And as time went on and I got to bigger stores, at one stage I was managing a big OPSM store and I had a good sized team. And so I would stay back overnight and do stuff. And the team were the ones that in the end said to me, you've got to stop doing this. And it helped me understand that there's a couple of things you need to be able to do. You need to be able to actually learn to get other people to do things. So you've got to be able to teach them. But you also got to take that hat off because you want to make sure that you've got a good relationship and you become friends with people. And I think that's the biggest issue around becoming a leader is how do I have a good relationship and keep it going, but at the same time maintain that friendship that I have, because a lot of the time you're their peer before you become their leader as well. So that often happens. So I used to have the conversations where I would say to them, we've got to have a serious conversation. And I used to say, I'm going to put my business hat on now. Generally when we're working, we're having fun, we have a great culture, we work well, and, we're all peers and we work well together. But every now and then I'd say, no, we have to have a serious one, which means I've got to put my business hat on. I need to pull away from that friendship that we have. I now have to have a conversation with you as a leader. And I used to be very honest about that and say that to them. And that made it much easier for us because it meant that they didn't fall into well, why are you doing that? You're my friend. Why would you do that to me? Why would you pull me up? Why wouldn't you, support me? Why wouldn't you cover for me? Why wouldn't you, work with it a different way because I'm your friend? It made them realize, I would say, I've got a job to do just like you have. And so my job is making sure that the practice runs well. And as a leader, I have to take responsibility for that. And sometimes it means I have to have these conversations. So sometimes I have to put the business hat on. And so my first conversation ever with them would be, okay, let me put this hat on, and I'd explain that to them and say, look, sometimes I do have to do this. I know I've got a great relationship. We have a great team. Every now and then I have to pull aside from that and put the leadership hat on, and I have to actually have this conversation with you. And today's one of those times. So that would be the first time I did it. Every time after that, if I had to do it, I would say, okay, we've got to have a chat. business hat time, and they would know exactly what I meant then. And then we would be able to sit down and have that. But it was only okay for me to do that because I had used the bank account. I had built a good relationship to put lots of deposits in. We also had a personal relationship, but it meant I could pull aside and be a little bit tougher when I had to be. I'm a pretty straightforward person, but I'm an extremely honest person and open. So it made it easy for me to have that conversation because I would be upfront with it. But then each time we did it, they actually understood exactly what it was about. They knew it wasn't about, you did this, you did that, bang, bang, bang. It was about, how do we make this better? This has happened.
Yeah.
It's not about talking about you. This has happened. This is the way it was handled. How do we handle it differently next time? So take a little bit of emotion out of it, take the finger pointing out of it, and start it by saying, look, we know we have to have this conversation. This has happened and you were involved in it. Let's talk about how we could do it better next time. Let's talk about a better way. Is there something you need to grow and to help you with your skills, the way you handle things, or, what is it that we need to do that will actually make this better next time? 9 times out of 10, they would go, yeah, I know. I buggered up. I did it. Yeah. Afterwards, I realized what I had done. I know I should have done it this way, and you just talk it through. So next time they're more aware. So generally when you have a good conversation, they have buy-in. They're actually really on board with it because they know they've done it. And if you've got that good relationship, they're very honest with you as well. So it makes it easier. But that's what I would do. The business hat would be the thing that I would go, I've got to be a leader now, put my business hat on. We've got to have a conversation outside of what we normally talk like. That's the way I would handle it. So I think you've got to come with something like that, something that's honesty with the team. They know exactly what it means when you say that, and then you can sit down and talk about it in a way that's meant to be about growth and addressing the situation that you want to address.
Yeah, and something I've seen lately that helps the mindset in that regard, I feel, is it's never me against you.
No.
It should be me and you against the problem.
We're always a team. It's us.
That's right. So it's more about, how do we tackle the challenge together? The challenge isn't me versus you or me again. It's more like, how are we addressing this?
Yeah.
And we're actually on the same side.
Yeah.
Where we want the same things. And that's assuming that the nature of the discussion, which I'm, for the purposes of the episode, is about wanting to get better and people being open to being better. Obviously, I guess we can speak that when that it's not, if there is something overly toxic or something that just there is things there that aren't. But I guess for the most part, most people do want to be in a good team and in a good environment. And if communication is done correctly, then we can position it like that.
Yeah.
And then hopefully tackle the challenge together. The nature with us in small businesses that we deal with, invariably we do become friends. But a big thing in our industry is family.
Yeah.
And so it can be husband and wife, or it could be, brother and sister, or uncle and auntie, or whatever it may be, any combination of that. Would you treat that any differently? And I know, the answer is probably going to be something along the lines of you don't, but how would you speak to that extra level of complexity?
I've dealt with a lot of husband and wife teams in practices. That happens quite a lot. And it does impact relationships. What I used to say to them was, I feel that of a night when you're traveling home, there needs to be a street that you pick on the way home that's about the halfway point where you say, once we get to this street, all work conversation stops. Once we pass that street, we become a couple again and we start talking about our home life, our kids, whatever we want to talk about, right? Anything we're going to be doing together. It's about the relationship and about us. And in the morning, the same thing. When you get ready in the morning, you hit that street. Once you pass that street, you can start to have a conversation about work. But you've also got to have a clear relationship and position within the practice, because you have to have one of you as the leader. And if that person, let's just say it's the optom, whether they're, whoever it is in the relationship, if let's say it's the optom and they are the one that is leading generally the whole team, then they have to be the one that leads the other spouse, okay? Because you can't have it opposing within, otherwise it's confusing for the team. So you have to make that call as well. I feel that it's good to sit down and work through things like who looks after what. So one of you might be better with people, so let that person do, HR, payroll, all that sort of stuff. The people come to them for conversations. Somebody else might be better at, choosing, products. So let them work with the team on managing, stock and stuff. So if you can manage that, and then it means that whoever is the one that is chosen, they have final decision in everything in the relationship on that. So you might have opposing views. Let's say you want to bring a new brand in. You might have opposing views on it. The person who's actually deemed to be the person looking after stock has the final say. You might have opposing views about something with HR. The person who's looking after HR, they're the ones that actually have the final say. So I think you've got to do things like that. But you also have to make sure that you have a strong enough relationship and have had really good conversations so that there's no getting upset at work, that you have to accept that you, like everyone else on the team, might sometimes have to have something said to you that might be a little bit hard to take because it's from your spouse.
Yeah.
But it's said in a way and it's done because of the business needs. It has nothing to do with your personal relationship. It's a strong couple that can do that really well. I've seen some couples do it really well.
Yeah.
And I've seen others that, individually come to me and I'm having little conversations off to the side trying to help, and others that do it openly. That's tougher because that's sometimes they'll openly talk about each other in front of each other, and that's tougher. And I have to sometimes say, hey, that's not what I'm here for. You guys need to sort this bit out. I'm here to help you.
100%.
And so I think that is, as long as they can come up and think about those rules, set them up to start with, and let the personal stuff sit at home when they're at work, that's the way that I would address it. But it is tough. It's really tough.
Yeah. And it's definitely not an exact science. And it's just, I guess, continual communication. I like the idea of the street. I think it's sort of almost with your friends or staff that become your friends, you've got the business hat, and with the partner, you've got the street.
Yeah.
So I think that they're two little tips, and they're not going to solve the problem all, but it could be sort of a stepping stone if that's something that's been identified.
Yeah.
When it's time to have the conversation, the difficult conversation that is, how do you determine that it is the time to have it as opposed to letting something slide or letting something go? At what point would you distinguish, with regards to when to make something a conversation or just to say, you know what, I'll let this one slide and we'll see what happens next time type of thing?
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one thing is, has it happened before? Because if you've let it slide before and you've not had the conversation, but it seems to be something that person does, you probably need to sit down and have a conversation about it at that stage to say, hey, look, I've noticed that, when this happens, sometimes this is the way you handle it. It probably can create a little bit of issues. So are you open if we have a bit of a chat about how we can deal with it differently so we can work with it, and work on it together and come up with a plan of how that can work? I feel that sometimes it's about resetting expectations. So one of the big things I think with the team is that they know their place, they know what they're there to do, they know what their role is covering, and they know what their expectations are. So if you've not set that really well with somebody, you can't then have a conversation about them doing something that upsets you or you think is not right because they never knew that was a problem. Sometimes the things that we want to talk to them about is just because they haven't done it the way we like it done. It's not because it's wrong. It's because it's done in a different way or goes against, what we want to achieve for our practice or our business, but we haven't really spelt that out to somebody. So I think it's really good at those times when you've seen that a thing happening and you've noticed it a couple of times. It might not be a big thing, but it's enough that eventually it's not great for the business, is to sit down and say, hey, we probably haven't chatted about this before. I've noticed that you've done this a couple of times. It probably goes against what we are trying to achieve in the business. So let me talk to you about that so you know exactly what my expectations are around that. And you need to get sign off from them. If somebody then continues to do that stuff, that's when you have to have those harder conversations and you have to make sure you're doing it all the time. So I think in the beginning it's about, is it something that is because they've never been told? Is it something because that's part of their personality and you need to address it because it's an issue? I think you've got to really look at it at a case-by-case scenario on the impact on the store. If you've got a team, consider the impact on the rest of the team because sometimes it might not be as big an issue for you, but two of the team members are coming to you and saying, this is a concern for us, so you need to address it because of that reason. So I think it's not a cut and dry thing of saying this is when you address it, this is when you address it. It's more about, it's a case-by-case scenario. It's how much it's impacting the business. It's about thinking about the team. It's about thinking about, where you sit, where your practice or your business is, what you want to be seen as, what you want to show the world, and is it buying into that? So does it buy into the culture that you have? Does it buy into your goals, your mission, your vision? And then working from there to say, well, I need to sit down and have that conversation, or this is really not something, and they just do it differently. I probably need to address myself that it's more of a control
Yeah.
issue and that I just don't like it
Yeah.
because they're doing it differently. So sometimes you've really got to think about it. Is it me or is it truly something that I need to address? So, yeah, bit of
Mm.
self-awareness.
Yeah.
Mm,
And let's say, so we've determined that there is a need to have the conversation for sort of
yeah.
the reasons that you've just mentioned. Are there any phrases or frameworks that you recommend? And I know what's been good about everything at this point is you've given some scripts as well and some examples of what perhaps to say in those type of situations. But are there any other phrases or frameworks that you recommend that can help keep the conversation, I guess, respectful and also, most importantly, to be productive and actually to get an outcome?
Yeah, I feel the best thing you can do when you have to have these conversations is plan. Planning will help you
Mm.
every step of the way. So if it's a really simple little thing, let's say you're doing a little bit of coaching on the floor, that's completely different. So they might have said something that you thought, oh, maybe they didn't give the customer what they needed. That's more coaching. That's a little bit different. But difficult conversations generally are something that you're going to sit down and have a bit of a conversation about. It's not something you just do on the fly. They tend to be a little bit more about, hey, we're going to chat about this. So there's two forms of that. There's the one that is just that we're just going to talk about it in general. So often, if you're a practice that has set up regular meetings with your team members, if you do a monthly catch up, fortnightly catch up with everyone in the team, then you'll just leave it to that time. And that's when you can have that, hey, we're doing this general catch up, but I have to put my business hat on, say, and address something that I saw the other day. If it's something that's a bit more serious, sometimes you have to give them the notice and you have to actually allow them to have a support person. So that's a little bit more involved in that. I think in any time, I would say the first port of call is to actually have a plan. So you need to write down what the thing is that you want to talk to them about. Write down and get it really clear in your mind. What is the behavior or the thing that happened that you need to address? Okay. You also need to have the evidence of when it happened, when you saw it, who it was with, because human nature is we'll get defensive. As soon as somebody asks us a question, if you haven't built the relationship, and most haven't yet, and you're going to have this conversation, and it is a more serious conversation, it is about something that you need to talk about, they'll get defensive. When did that happen? I don't remember that. Tell me exactly who I said that to. Tell me exactly when I did that. So when you're planning, you need to have that. You need to actually be able to say to them, well, I actually saw you do this with Mrs. Jones on Thursday last week when you were talking about this. And Mrs. Jones asked this, and this was your reply. So you need to actually have really good detail around it. Then it doesn't become about, well, generally, I think this is the way you work, which becomes a bit
Yeah.
more subjective. It's more objective because it's about a particular situation and there's facts to go with it. So plan, do
Mm.
that. And plan about, make sure when you have this conversation, it's in a quiet place. Make sure you won't get any interruptions. Make sure when you set the time, you don't change it. Show them respect by not changing it. Because when you change it for something else, they start to go, well, I'm not as important. And you don't want to start a conversation out badly because you've had to move it 3 times. So try and stick to it, is what I would say. You've got to be a bit curious and open. You've got to give them the chance to come back about it. So when you say, this is what I saw, I want to talk about it because I feel that we need to look at a better way of dealing with that. Or maybe let's talk about different things you could have said at the time. Or do you feel there's a different way or a better way you could have, handled that or reacted to that? But allow them the time to come back. You've got to really listen actively and take on board. You've got to make sure you don't come in prejudging. Don't go in there thinking, well, they've done the wrong thing. I'm going to give them a warning at the end or I'm going to have a go at them. You've got to go in going, well, you don't know what drove them to say that. You don't know what happened. You might get a kick in the guts for them saying, well, you've never told me this before. And you've got to sit back and go, well, hold on a second. No, I haven't. So you can't really prejudge and have a predetermined plan. So you've got to be really open. Be a bit empathetic and understanding. You've got to really, nod, do all the good body language, show that you're listening, sit forward. Don't get defensive. Don't sit back. Don't, start to look around. Never have your phone there. Never have anything that can interrupt you. Make sure that you're giving them the time so you're showing that you really are there to address it and be really, open and understanding. The aim is to get an outcome, right? A positive outcome. So make sure you do that. And make sure that you manage your emotions. Your job as a leader is to actually make sure that you are the calm one, that you don't get defensive because sometimes they deflect because they don't want to address it. They know they've done wrong. They feel bad about it, but they don't know what else to do. So they'll start saying, well, you do it. or such and such does it. So you've got to hold your emotions and you've got to control the conversation. So when somebody starts to say things like that, you've got to say things like, we're not talking about them today, we're talking about you. So let's just address the situation with you. If I need to talk to somebody else about what they're doing, I'll do that. Today I'm talking to you. But in a nice way, pull it back in. Allow the silences is one thing I would say is a big thing while you're doing it. A lot of the time people need time to think. And sometimes if you feel it's a bit uncomfortable and you come in and try and say something, you can impact the outcome of that conversation. So give them the chance to do it. Some people get emotional. Allow them to be emotional. You don't have to let's stop it, calm it down. You just give them a few minutes, let them be emotional and do stuff. So I think you just got to really, take the time. And then at the end, the main thing is setting a goal of, okay, we've got great outcomes here. We've talked about this. So in the future, when this happens, this is what we're going to do. Get agreements from them, set it all up. If the requirement is that you need to, put some training on, at the end you say, okay, well, we obviously know now that we need to work on this a little bit more. So let's book a time in for next week and you and I are going to sit and we're going to go through this a little bit more and give you a little bit more training. So make sure you have an outcome as well. So I'd say plan, make sure that you've got a quiet space, listen, be empathetic and open and curious, and make sure you have an outcome at the end of it. So some sort of agreement or some sort of plan of what you do for next steps.
And what are some of the more common mistakes that you see people make during these conversations?
I feel that prejudging is one. A little one that I would give you an example of, which is a common one in lots of businesses, somebody's coming late. Somebody's coming late, regularly to work. And a lot of people will just make the assumption that they're just a bit slack and they just, they're not doing the right thing. They're coming late. Everyone else can get there on time. Why can't they? So instead of going and asking the question of, hey, I've noticed that of late you are coming late regularly. Is there anything happening at home? Is there anything that I can help you with that? Most people go in and go, hey, our start time is this. You've been coming late every day. I need you to get here on time. Everyone else can do it. So don't just make assumptions and judge. Make sure that when you go and talk to them, you give them that opportunity. So I think that that's one thing is don't assume. Don't assume that you know what's going on. Don't assume that you know what the issue is. Being really open. So I think that's a mistake I see a lot of people do. I see that people don't plan. I see that people try and have a conversation in front of other people. That's bad. That's bad news. You can't talk to somebody because that's when they will get their back up. That's when they will feel like you have pushed me into a corner. They will get angry and come at you a lot of the time. They will get defensive. They will try and say, well, Julie over there's doing it. Why aren't you saying something to Julie? She does it too. I saw her doing it. You've got to make sure that you give them the space. I think it's about being respectful. We've got to think about if it was us, what would we like to happen? Because most people don't set out to be bad. Most people don't set up to do a bad job. Most people do what they can with what they're given. And a lot of the time there's stuff that comes from home that impacts people. And a lot of people don't know how to deal with that. Some people can come to work and you wouldn't know they have issues at home. But a lot of people come to work and they bring it to work. And so there's things that they can't avoid from home because it's life, but it's starting to impact work. But we're not actually addressing that. We're just making assumptions and making them feel worse about what's happening at home. And they keep saying, yeah, I'll try and do the right thing, even though they know they can't do the right thing because this issue's not being addressed. So, yeah, I think the mistakes are prejudging, not planning, not being open to listen, not making sure that they've, planned and they've booked, good spaces. They sometimes feel the need to give reasons. So when there's a bit of a break in the conversation between the person having, talking about the hard conversation and the person receiving it, if there's a bit of silence, and I think I talked before about silence, sometimes the person who's there talking to them feels the need to break the silence by giving more information or, trying to add in things, giving reasons, then that creates an issue because you've got to give the person time, right? And I feel that, sometimes people don't back down. They haven't listened to the other person, so they're not backing down. They keep pushing the point and it shows that they're not really listening. So they've got something in mind. They feel like they've got an outcome or they think that they know the reason why something's happening, so they keep pushing on it. I think if you don't allow enough time, that's a mistake. You've got to make sure that even though you set aside a little bit of time, maybe give more time than you think because you never know how that conversation is going to go. And you don't want to cut them off because that's the worst thing you can do at the end. And I think that not giving the facts, a lot of people generalize. So that's a big mistake. I
Okay.
think they'll go in there for a conversation they haven't planned.
Mm.
And so they're not giving facts, because
Yeah.
Mrs. Jones, it was Thursday at 2 p.m. and you were talking about this and this is what you
Precisely.
said, as opposed to, yeah, I heard you last week with a customer. That's
Mm.
not enough for somebody,
Mm.
because in most people's minds, we're doing a good job. And so unless you can tell me specifically, I'm not going to remember exactly what it is because I don't know.
Yeah. Two other things that we've touched on slightly, but I guess if I can expand on them. One being the importance of language when we're communicating through a tough conversation. And I guess what to be mindful of when we're using our words and choosing our words in those types of conversations. Obviously, I'm sure there's some obvious things to point out, but anything from that point of view that you've got to let us know about. And the other thing would be the emotional reactions. We did touch on emotions are invariably a part of this for both parties, I feel, for both people. So what's the best way to manage the emotional component of the conversation, especially when they're difficult in nature, as we're sort of discussing?
Yeah. The emotional side is really tough. You've got to expect the unexpected. I think you can't plan for that. I think you can only manage your own emotions by making sure that you're remaining calm, that you don't react to things, that you continue to listen, that you continue to allow time for them to be emotional if they're going to be emotional, be reactive if they're going to be reactive. It's only when they get pretty bad, if they really start getting really upset, that you might want to say, hey, I think that, it's probably not a good time for us to continue this now. Let's
Yeah.
stop the conversation now and we'll come back to it. But generally, most of the time, it's not that bad a reaction. It's just sometimes they're a little bit upset. Most people like to think they're doing a good job. So when they're being told that something's happened, they'll get a bit emotional. So I'd say, the emotion, just make sure that you're in check of your emotions.
Mm.
Make sure that if somebody says something and you want to react, take a second, do the old count to 10 in your head, take a few deep breaths, think about, your response before you say it. A lot of the time our issues are because we speak before we're thinking.
Yeah.
Give yourself time to think about it and really think about how you're going to react to something. So I think emotionally, that's what I would do. When you look at the way people react to people and the way they judge and things, the words you use are a small amount. The tone is more the thing
Okay.
that people will consider, right? So, and body
Right.
language. They're the two components that really come across. But the words are important as well. So instead of saying, you did this, it's more, the other day this happened. And I noticed
Right.
that this is the way the conversation went. So you've got to take out the pointing of the finger and saying you. I think you touched on before about the us and the we language, so about being a
Mm-hmm.
team. So when you're talking about, look, I noticed this was happening the other day. As a team, we want to work on these things and I want to help you.
Yeah.
You can say I. It's all right to say I because you can put yourself in it as much as you want. But, I want to make sure that we are, working as a team and we're, fixing things. So let's talk together now and work out how we can do things. So, the we, I, but not you, as in having a
Mm.
go, but,
Mm.
the conversation, taking out, anything that is about, being subjective, generalizations, trying to minimize. I mean, you and I are good talkers, Michael, so we talk a lot. But when you're having
Mm.
conversations like this with somebody, you have to be a little bit more precise. You have to
Mm.
be direct.
Mm.
If you waffle and try and go around because you're scared of what the conversation's, are going to end up like, the point is lost.
Yeah. So I was thinking, so you want to get to the point.
You want to get to the point. So you've got to be a bit direct. So that's why having the facts is really good. So, when you're sitting down and saying, look, got to have a bit of a conversation, putting my business hat on, I want to chat to you about what happened the other day. The other day on the floor, with Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Jones asked this question. Your reply was this. I want to talk about that reply.
Mm.
How do you feel that reply went? How do you feel
Mm.
that was in relation to what the patient was asking? Do you feel that we could do it better? Could I work with you so that we could do this a little bit better? You're asking them to give an opinion on something, right? So that it is their understanding that there is an issue, but you're not saying you did a bad thing and I want you to go and think about it, or next time I want you to do it, and you're giving them the outcome. You're actually having a conversation so that collectively you're coming up with the solution, then you get more buy-in. So language
Mm.
is important in that respect. But I feel that I've learned over the years, I'm quite an even speaker. People say that to me all the time, whether I'm having a conversation about something bad or something good. I might get a little bit, when I'm excited and I talk faster, but generally my tone is, I've learnt my tone because I deal with people a lot. So I feel that you've just got to, I think, start to think about that, slow yourself down a little bit, be precise, be direct, make sure that you're using the right words. You're not using anything accusing. You're not telling them they've done something wrong. You're actually opening a conversation up. That's sort of the language I would think. But the other consideration is your body language and your tone. So your body language, you can't, I think we talked a little bit before about you can't be sitting back like this, like I know exactly what this is about and I know what you did and I'm going to give you the answer. It's more about being forward, being really open. I'm a very big hand speaker when I talk to people, but I'm very open in my speech. So, eye contact is really important. Nodding your head is really important. And really, sometimes it's like handling a complaint from a customer. When they say something and you repeat it to them, where they might say, well, da-da-da, and you say, well, actually what you're saying is you think this. Is that correct? Yep, I think that's a great idea. I think we could incorporate that. Let's work on that one. So you go back and you're saying again what they've said to you to confirm, number one, that that's exactly what they meant. But number two is to show that you're listening. And then number three, to actually say, well, I think it's a great outcome and use it as a tool. Sometimes it's actually good to let them have a win with something that means nothing in what you're trying to achieve. It actually won't impact an outcome. It's probably not going to fix the situation. Sometimes it's actually really good to give them a win to get buy-in. So it might be that what they're suggesting has nothing to do with what you're talking about. It might mean that what they're suggesting will make no difference and it might be against everything you're thinking about. But giving them a bit of win gets buy-in. And sometimes that's really important too, because then you can move on to some other outcomes that will actually strengthen what you're trying to achieve anyway. So sometimes giving in and letting them win is good as well.
And as we start to wrap it up, and I guess to draw all the pieces of this puzzle together, can you share a success story where, you've been privy to a difficult conversation, whether you were in the conversation or heard about the conversation, and how it actually strengthened a team or led to personal growth with a particular person? Or
one industry I was working in, there was an issue where I was sort of like an area manager, and they said that there was a person causing problems in a team, and they wanted me to actually try and, talk through how we could, get rid of them. They hadn't been with the business for that long. And so I went out and had a conversation with this person, and they were sort of, they helped the manager, like the leader of the store. And when I spoke to the person, I found that their story was that the leader themselves was a bit of a bully. And that the issue that they were having is that every time they suggested something, the person said, no, that's not what I want to do. And the conversation was more, and the issues were more around a personality clash, but also the fact that they were being bullied. The person was, like clapping at them and snapping their fingers and doing all weird and wonderful stuff in their conversation with them. So I went back and spoke to HR, and then I did a little bit of a deep dive into the team and found that they had had 3 people leave in the last, 12 months. And when I dove a bit deeper, it seemed like the same sorts of things were being said. So then I went and spoke to the whole team and found that they all felt the same way about the leader, and that the leader was a little bit of a bully. A lot of them needed the job, so wouldn't go anywhere else. And so I ended up in the end having to go and have a conversation with the leader, not the person that they originally had thought was the problem. And that in the end, they had to let go the leader. Right. And that person ended up having to leave the business. And what ended up happening was the team themselves just became a different team, because they found that somebody had finally listened to them and somebody had finally helped the whole situation, instead of taking the side of the leader that always happened, because it was a really strong store. They had really good results. And so this person was, fairly, outgoing in the way they spoke. They contributed a lot to leadership meetings. So the management believed that there's no way there could have been an issue with the leader. So they had left everything alone and just let it slide. And so when we actually delved deeper, it was actually, the leader themselves that was causing problems. So, so that's, a story outside of optics. I mean, I've got a few in optics, but It just
Yeah,
shows you that it's not always as black and white.
yeah,
Sometimes the hard conversations are to actually go against what the assumptions are, so prejudging and actually thinking about, different ways to approach it. But listening to people makes a big difference. And once you listen, you
yeah,
get the truth generally. If you're asking the right questions and you're actually going about it in a way that, people see that you're being truthful and open, they'll open up to you and then you can
yeah,
get a good outcome out of it. And this outcome was the store grew even more. So even though they were trading well, they actually traded even better afterwards
yeah.
because they had a much better culture in the store, and that the team themselves felt appreciated and listened to, and then
Mhm.
they gave back because of that.
Yeah, I've heard some success stories, and I'm sure you definitely heard the same, but where there was a difficult conversation that was had, and because it was done in the right way, that actually the respect between the individuals grew, and they
Yes.
were able to have a difficult conversation, and it actually ended up succeeding, and they were able to lay it out on the
Yeah,
table in a constructive manner, and in doing so, it basically set the relationship up for further success because it was like, well, we
absolutely.
know that we can have these conversations, we can improve, and as a result, there is more trust between them,
Yeah,
and then that enabled them to basically continue and develop, and basically work towards improving the
yeah,
store and the dynamics, and I feel like that's probably something that it could have gone either way,
yeah.
but it's definitely the positive side of it. And I feel like it's an important conclusion to make as we sort of wrap it up. It's more or less that difficult conversations, while they may be hard at the time, if done in the right way and everyone's open to it, it becomes a positive thing. It becomes a
It does become a
constructive
positive.
thing,
Yeah, yeah,
and then it strengthens the relationship. And so I feel that's where I've seen a lot of positivity come from, something that is initially quite a negative thing and quite stressful as well, potentially. And finally, Joe, just to wrap up today's conversation, what's one thing someone listening can try this week if they've been putting off a difficult conversation?
okay. I think self-awareness, I feel what you've got to say is why. Why am I avoiding it? What is the issue that I've been avoiding? And then work out what the next steps are. So if you're concerned that it's about the response of the person, if you're concerned because you don't know how to have the conversation, if you avoid it because it's something that you just don't like to do, work out what the issue is. So why are you avoiding it? And then just do a little bit of homework and get yourself ready so that you can move forward on it. You've really got to think about the fact that it can impact your business heavily. It can impact the team dynamics. It can impact, everyone wanting to come to work. It can impact, the growth and the success of your practice or your business. So try to understand why you're avoiding it and try to put something into place to fix it. Take your time. If you've been avoiding it for a while, it doesn't matter if it's going to be another couple of weeks, but just put the time in, do a bit of research, and then move forward with it. Usually, once you've done the first one, you realize it's not that hard and it will make a
Mm,
difference. So, do it. And I assure you, it will get easier as time goes on.
cool. Awesome chat today, and really like this topic because it's something a little bit different, but something that's so instrumental and I guess foundational to any successful practice and team for that matter. So thank you so much for your insights today, Joe, and looking forward to our next chat.
Thank you. Chat anytime.
Thank you for joining us on The Focused View, proudly presented by Opticare. It's been our privilege to share the insights and stories that resonate deeply with the eye care community. We hope today's episode has not only inspired you, but also armed you with the practical strategies and innovative ideas to help you enhance your practice and professional journey. If you found value in our conversation, we'd be grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. And share this episode with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals like you and grow our community of visionaries. Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website www.thefocusedview.com.au for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.